Good evening. Good evening. Councillor Stella, good evening. Good evening, staff, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the City's Public Agenda Forum. My name is Councillor Janelle Sewell and I'll be chairing this forum this evening. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're meeting on, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We wish to acknowledge their elders, past, present and future, and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. The operation of this forum is in accordance with the City's adopted Public Agenda Briefing Forum Policy and Procedure and is governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, Standing Orders and Rules of Conduct. This Agenda Briefing Forum will provide the opportunity for elected members to be informed and seek additional information on matters prior to the presentation of these items to the next ordinary meeting of Council for consideration and decision. This meeting is also live streamed and I would like to welcome those watching remotely. Thank you so much for your interest. Do we have any attendance, apologies and leave of absence to announce? CEO?
Yes, apologies from Councillor Giardina and also Councillor Cannon.
Are there any declarations of interest to be made this evening? I haven't received any.
Through the chair, I've not been given any either.
Have we received any public submissions in writing?
Through the chair, no.
And any petitions received for today?
Through the chair, no.
We have two confidential items to discuss and we can discuss these behind closed doors if required at the end of the meeting, councillors. I'd like to now go on to reports to Council. Could please start with a presentation by James Wickens, Manager for Environmental Health and Community Safety. Thanks, James.
Good evening, councillors. So I've just got two presentations tonight in the community safety area. So the first presentation we're doing today is on the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Plan, which was recently endorsed at the last Community Safety Crime Prevention Advisory Committee. And I'll also be doing a presentation on the Fire Hazard Assessment Plan for season 2020-2021. Okay, so the Community Safety Crime Prevention Plan 2020-25 was endorsed at the last advisory committee meeting on the 12th of August in 2020. And this plan has actually spanned two advisory committees. It's been some time since the previous plan was finalised, and now we've got to this point. So sort of fantastic outcome to get here today. So the plan was informed by a thorough community consultation process. We actually received up to 565 feedback from the community, from both the households and the business sector. So it was a fantastic community consultation process. And the actual draft plan was sent out for further advertising. We received approximately 20 or so responses to the draft plan. The plan itself contains 5 broad strategy areas, these being community awareness, programs and partnerships, physical environment, emergency management and ranger services, and precinct planning. So the actions and strategies will be monitored by the Community Safety and Crime Prevention Advisory Committee, which is they'll oversee the plan and obviously the actions and see that they're implemented. So like I said, the plan was endorsed by the committee on the 12th of August. There has been some minor amendments made to the plan since the plan was endorsed by the committee, and these have gone through the normal process and having the report here today. So some of the phrasing has changed, but the intent certainly hasn't changed. It's a bit of grammar and spelling and the like. But what probably the main change has been one of the actions which was contained within the strategy hasn't been removed as such. It's no longer an action, but it's now in the back of the plan under the funding and resources and implementation section, and that's in relation to the 0.5, a minimum 0.5 FTE to help resource the plan. Any questions?
Councillor Boyd, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. As you mentioned, James, and as noted in the report, there's an indication of funding for 0.5 FTE. I'm just wondering what the current FTE allocated to community safety crime prevention is, and if it's currently not at 0.5, is there the potential for that to come to fruition should the plan be adopted by council?
Thanks, Councillor Boyd. Currently, there's a 0.2 allocation to the to this role, so that's 1 day a week, and certainly future positions will be subject to the budget process and dealt with in that way. Yeah.
Through the chair, I might add further to that. With the implementation of the plan, depending on the action that's being undertaken, we do draw on resources from other departments to assist with implementing that. But a key outcome would be monitoring through the Crime Prevention Committee the implementation of this plan, and if there's a need to increase that resource, we will seek through the budgeting processes and the like and workforce planning processes to have that increased, depending on the nature of the actions that are being implemented. But we do work very closely with a number of business units across the various organisations, across the various teams within the organisation, and that 0.5 FTE might not necessarily be a position that's dedicated, but it might be effort that comes from other teams as well.
Any further questions, councillors? Okay. Are there any questions from the public gallery? Thank you. Moving on. If you could now present, please, James, on the fire hazard assessment plan.
Thank you very much. So the Fire Hazard Assessment Plan, season 2020, is the city's strategy for enables the officers to basically enforce the city's fire hazard reduction notice. So this is actually, it's a procedure, I guess, in how we actually go about and do that work, and it actually provides a risk-based approach to fire hazard assessments, and it is an action of the city's bushfire risk management plan. Like I was saying, it supports the fire hazard reduction notice, and it provides that risk-based approach, and it enables the officers, when they're out on site, and certainly when they're communicating with the community, to have a robust plan which really underpins the work that they do. So this plan itself, it replaces the city's fire hazard assessment plan from season 1920, and it's the 4th year that the city has adopted this approach in having a fire hazard assessment plan. Is there any questions?
Councillor Stillard?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. Just perception. It says here on page 20, number 9, it says the city is encouraging those residents that consider the physical characteristics of property, so on, and that with and so on, late variation applications may incur an administration fee of $150. I was wondering, I mean, this adopting it now and having it out there, that we're adopting it now, and it would have been, if it was last month, it would be a great reminder to do it, you know what I mean? Rather than saying it now and putting it out now and it gets passed in 2 weeks' time, to tell them that if you don't have it in by the 1st of October, it's a $150 fine. It may, but I'm just wondering, is it possible for future years we do this, that we can get it done by September? Is that a possibility? I don't know, I'm just asking.
Through the chair, thank you for your query, Councillor Stallard. The city actually releases and gazettes its fire hazard reduction notice earlier in the year, that occurs in around the May timeframe, and the fire hazard reduction notice actually gets posted out with the city's rates. So the outline of what landowners need to do on their properties in terms of fire hazard reduction is well known and out within the community, and the city has a comprehensive community engagement plan that sits behind that fire hazard reduction notice. And you may have seen online and also throughout the city's fire risk areas, there's been street meets and bushfire ready groups and those sorts of things that have been meeting and in preparation for implementation of the notice in the upcoming fire season. This plan outlines, as James has highlighted, the procedures for our staff that are on private properties and assessing those properties and the manner in which the fire hazard notice will be assessed. So for the past few years, as James has highlighted, it has come up around this time. I can take your feedback on board, Councillor Stallard, and we can look to have this come forward to council a month or two earlier to put that out in the community. But notwithstanding this item on the agenda or on a council agenda, there's a comprehensive engagement program that sits behind the notice, notwithstanding the notice also goes out with the rates and is gazetted earlier.
Thank you, through the chair. I understand that. I'm just thinking that it would be great as a like a bit of a last resort to get out there and say, here's your chance, get it done. I just saw it that way rather than happening now and then putting that in there to say, if you haven't. I just thought we need to tell people as many times as possible because we all forget.
Understood, and I appreciate that, Councillor Stallard. Another reason why there is a fee associated with later variations to the notice is that the city is very eager to have those variations in place and on record as soon as possible, so that if an event happens, the city's Chief Fire Control Officer knows where the properties are that have variations, and if an event was to occur, we know where those properties are with variations, so that when the volunteer brigades are sent out on site, we know where those variations are, and it encourages those landowners that require variations to get them in sooner and for the city to have those variations on the database at the earliest possible opportunity, which is part of the reason we put the fee in place, because it encourages people to get it in sooner rather than later.
Councillor O'Connor, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. In the plan under risk identification, it has a bushfire prone area map, and it looks like, I imagine there's a lot of city controlled land or facilities in that map. What's the city's obligation to comply with the requirements of the bushfire notice as sent out in late June this year?
Yeah, if I could refer that to Director of Asset Planning, Brett Jackson.
Thank you, through the chair. The fire retention for our verges and public open spaces under care and control of the city are governed by the Bushfire Risk Management Plan that was adopted by Council in December 2019, which is a risk-based approach to the assessment of the hazards in each specific area. The program the city implements is predominantly assessment of the type of vegetation that's there and how much it could contribute to a fuel load, noting that introduced species of grasses die down in the winter and do become fuel loads, whereas native grasses generally don't. So we do take the risk-based approach, and a program of spraying and slashing is in place and has been for some time in addressing these issues.
Follow-up question, please. And so, just could you outline? So I take it that that's different to the requirements of the bushfire notice, or is that the same? So the city has to comply with that notice or not?
The bushfire notice, the city, it's governed by the Bushfires Management Act, which requires us to undertake a bushfire risk management plan and act in accordance with that. And so that's the response to compliant with the Act. And the bushfire notice is applied to private property.
Any other questions, councillors? No questions from the public gallery. Thank you very much, James. I have a question.
Just first of all, I'd like to compliment the fire officers of this city. They do a fantastic job.
Sorry,
and
can I just interrupt, Mr. Forrest? Could you just state your name and your
Peter
address,
Forrest,
please?
36 Panoramic Coast, Kalamunda. They do a terrific job in with teams. They go around the area, they do inspections, they give us, we've got a network in our area, an email comes out, and there's Chris Grobber, I think, is the person that deals with it, and they keep us well informed about progress all the time. I've got a question to do with that was asked of me by someone new to the area who lives just below the hospital, which obviously is a fire-prone area. She's new to the area, and she wanted to know, I've referred it to a councillor, but I'm not sure whether she did, what happens if someone visits the property, gives a notice that clearing has to be done. If it doesn't all get completed in time, what's the status of those notices from the point of view if a fire happens and they have to make a claim on their insurance? Is that a sort of clear area? Is the notice a legal notice in the sense that the insurance company would rely on it?
Through the chair, thank you for your question, Mr. Forrest. Matters of insurance claims are between private property owners and their insurer.
Yeah, sure.
Notwithstanding, the fire hazard reduction notice is issued under the Bushfires Act, so it is a legally enforceable piece of substitutory legislation, and any insurance claims and any insurance investigation may request details around compliance with the notice, but we can't speak on behalf of insurance companies or private property owners. That's a matter primarily for them to deal with directly with their insurer.
Yeah, that was more or less what I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James, for your presentation. I'd now like to call on Doug Bartlett, Manager Asset Planning, to discuss the closure of southeastern end of Nardine Close. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors, staff and members of the public. Tonight just a very short report on this southeastern end of Nardine Close. We're seeking council approval to implement the permanent closure in accordance with the Local Government Act. This was advertised to the public on the 17th of July. We've received inquiries from the directly affected residents, and just in confirming the intent of the closure, which is to enable it to be reopened when such time as they wish to develop their properties, which we understand is probably within a year or two. This is just a quick picture showing you the nature of the closure, just simply plastic water-filled barriers which will remain in place until such time as council approve the reopening again of that end section of that road, and the tie marks show the nature of the problem. So there is the recommendation. Thank you.
Any questions, councillor? Councillor Boyd?
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. I note in the report it states that number 14, permission will be given to residents and visitors of number 116 Sultana Road West across the closed section. I'm just curious as to how that happens, given the barriers. I would assume we want them to be fixed and not be opening and closing. Or have they got permission to open and close them? I would thought if they're able to be open and closed, anyone then can come and open and close them. I'm just a bit curious as to how that works.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd. Through the chair, we have to start the story. Gone the wrong way. The last part of the recommendation talks about we're authorised by the City of Kalamunda, which this covers that arrangement. The reason for this is that property actually has a driveway running northeast from the end of Nardine Close up to Sultana Road West. That is where they access their property from, and so they need to be able to cut across the top end of the road to be able to get to their driveway. It's actually a split block of land. It's a very strange arrangement.
Yeah, maybe I can clarify my question. I don't have a problem with the rationale. I have a problem with the physical aspect of doing it. how are they physically going to move those barriers? And if they're physically able to be removed, then surely the Hoons can come in and physically remove them and keep doing what they've been doing.
Certainly through the chair, that access point's at the behind the barriers, so they don't touch the barriers at all.
Sorry, through the chair, to clarify, a section 350 closure requires some standard wordage, including authorised persons by the City of Kalamunda. It's a provision that just gives us some flexibility to allow, if we have to allow people to pass that. As Mr Bartlett has indicated, the residents and all their visitors access the property from Sultana.
Thanks for that clarification. Any further questions? Okay. No questions from the public gallery. Thank you very much. And if we could now have your presentation, Brett, on Director of Asset Services on FOGO, which I'm excited to hear about. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and to welcome councillors, members of the public, colleagues. Tonight's presentation is discussing a report regarding where the city will eventually send its FOGO waste from its residential curbside collections for disposal. Just to recap, Council has already determined through the waste plan that we will progress towards a FOGO waste collection service. What was not resolved in that is where we send it. The Eastern Metropolitan Regional Council, of which the City of Kalamunda is one of the 6 members, has been working towards a tender to construct a FOGO processing plant at the Red Hill Waste Transfer Centre. The requirement of the tenders, there's various contract models that could be enabled, ranging from a simple get a contract to build this, thanks for coming, to a quite complex design, build, operate and transfer type model. So to provide bidders with certainty that they're going to get some FOGO or what volume of FOGO is guaranteed, the EMRC passed a resolution on the 17th of September seeking that each member council have their council agree to commit their FOGO waste to the EMRC subject to an acceptable gate fee. So this report is just acting upon the request from the Council of the Eastern Metropolitan Regional Council that we, the City of Kalamunda, determine, subject to an acceptable gate fee, to send our FOGO waste to EMRC. Are there any questions regarding that?
Councillor Boyd?
Yeah, thank you, through the chair. Brett, I note you stated, and I'm not sure if it was on purpose, emphasised subject to a suitable gate fee. Has the city looked at what we would deem as a suitable gate fee, and should the EMRC not provide us with a suitable gate fee, what other options are available?
Thank you. Through the chair, the council has not considered what is a suitable gate fee at this point in time. We have not presented anything concrete in that range. Our waste plans, when we first considered these a year ago, gave an indication that they'd be there or thereabouts at what our current landfill price is, which is $140 a tonne plus the EMRC secondary waste reserve levy. Secondly, so once the tender process is completed by EMRC, we'll have a better understanding what they're proposing for a gate fee, and I'm sure, like every other member council, there will be a robust discussion about what will be acceptable to the member councils. In second question is, what happens if we don't agree to the gate fee? At this point in time, there are a limited number of FOGO processors within the Perth and Peel region. The challenge will be that the state government, more importantly, has, as much as every other council, is trying to marry capacity to process FOGO with the demand that will be created by each council as they adopt their waste plans in accordance with the state's waste strategy. The advantage, however, is that Red Hill is actually really fit for purpose. It's one of a few sites in Perth and Peel that can really cater for FOGO processing. So the land issues and all those sorts of things that are usually risks involved in setting up a facility and thus a gate fee are probably diminished in this case. But until we see the results of the tenders from EMRC, I can't comment any further what not the target number will be.
Councillor Ritchie, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, my memory serves that at Red Hill they were looking to develop a particular process. A pilot plant was being developed to deal with the FOGO. I'm just wondering,
Sorry.
are we looking at something different now?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Through the chair, two of our member councils of EMRC, Mundaring and Bayswater and Bassadine, have already gone down the path of FOGO, and they needed FOGO processing straight away. So the EMRC have made some open windrow FOGO plants for their volume only. They cannot be, and they're not the end product or the end system for the 6 member councils and potentially other councils. The system is not scalable in that regard.
So just to follow up, if I may, so is that, whatever that plant was that we had some briefing on, is that still feasible, still being developed?
It's in use. It's in use at the moment, and as part of the analysis, the what next for it after the main FOGO processor is a point of discussion with the council member, the EMRC tech officers and council members.
I have a question, Director. Thank you. So in terms of opportunities for the City of Kalamunda with the process material that will be created, it doesn't really touch on that in this report. Can you advise if we are making this investment to EMRC, if there will be an opportunity for us to get some of the process material back for utilisation within the city or to sell, or what happens to the actual process material?
That is going to be dependent on the tender model that is adopted, because the various models that EMRC are proposing, the ownership of the composted product that's generated may rest with EMRC or it may rest with the contractor. It's something that's going to go through the tender process to understand. One option being explored, of course, is that member councils can access some of the product either at a discounted or commercial rate. Again, these are some of the things that will be teased out, and brought back to council once we develop and assess the tenders.
Thank you. Any other further questions? All right. Thank you for that. Now, I believe you also are going to be providing a solar farm feasibility.
Thank you. Okay, so as council recollects, back in November 2019, council considered a pre-feasibility study that was undertaken into a solar farm for the City of Kalamunda. The pre-feasibility touched upon issues such as site, capacity, benefits, site footprint issues and constraints. And it was recommended, and council agreed, that we actually further develop that pre-feasibility study into a feasibility study and funded it through this year's budget. We appointed a consultant, NHA Consulting, who, whilst they're based in Melbourne, are actually well versed in developing feasibility studies for solar farms, especially, and in this context, solar farms that could go on tip sites. As the feasibility study has concluded, a part of Pioneer Park in Forest Field is probably been identified as the most suitable site that the city currently has as freehold or under a management order. In other words, we don't have to procure land. So that's why the Pioneer Park seemed to be the most feasible site. It was also because of its proximity to a major Western Power zone substation located within Perth Airport across the road, across Abernathy Road. The analysis by the feasibility study concluded, from a financial and risk perspective, that it's best that we start small and, if possible, scale up at some future stage. The target size or capacity of 800 kilowatts, that matches what the city currently puts to the market for our contestable electricity loads for city-operated buildings and facilities. So we can get a power purchase agreement in place for those without having to do too much regulatory problem and issues. So it was seen as a good risk mitigation. Moreover, the potential exists because there was an old gas extraction plant, methane extraction and power connection on the site from a lessee that's there at the present time that has a connection to the Western Power network. Conclusion could be that that could be used, subject to commercial negotiations, to get into the Western Power network without incurring significant Western Power costs. The issue would be if we were looking to explore with Western Power a large-scale plant, their flag fall for their studies in the order of $300,000, and it would provide a cost estimate in the order of plus or minus 50%. So furthermore, the consultants' recommendation is they recognise that perhaps the city operating power plants is not core business, and that perhaps a good model outcome would be to seek expressions of interest from the market for an operator to potentially lease the site and develop the farm with us as an anchor contract of load. We also need to undertake further work with the Western Australian Planning Commission, who have planning control over the site, to have approval in principle that we could place a solar farm there. The officer level within the WAPC are insisting that a development application go forward from the city before they would give us their feedback. That in itself incurs significant costs with large risks. And the final point I wish to make is the emerging value and benefit of large-scale battery storage, especially in emerging state and federal energy policies. It's becoming apparent it's not fully explored or understood yet. This site could lend itself to a complementary battery storage large-scale plant as well, and we think that at this point in time it would be premature to just commit to one locked-in technology until we understand better where the state and federal government's energy policies are emerging, and that could be potentially some funding assistance as well. So the recommendation is that, first of all, we undertake community consultation on the proposed farm and its location at Pioneer Park. We seek expressions of interest from the commercial market. Are there potential operators willing to operate on site, noting that that has occurred in other council areas? We continue our advocacy with the WAPC at senior level to at least get them to address an approval in principle or not. And we complete our contaminated site assessment that's underway for Pioneer Park. Thus, we now understand the constraints from the contaminated site assessments better. Thank you.
Councillor Blee, you have a question?
Yes, if the site was set up and the solar panels were in place, would the grounds be accessible for people to walk around?
The intent would be that the core operating panels area would be fenced off for obvious issues to do with vandalism, etc. But the footprint suggested is small enough that the leisure activity that currently occurs in Pioneer could continue in some shape or form. People could still walk their dogs, etc., and those sorts of things.
That's my question. That'd be great. Thank you.
Councillor Thomas, you have a question?
Is it a huge cost to assess the contamination on the site?
I might pass that question to our Director of Development Services, who's actually got that work underway.
Through the chair, the city has a contaminated sites levy that raises funds for the city's management of its various contaminated sites, and that money is put into a reserve account, and there's ongoing management of our various contaminated sites, with Pioneer Park being one of those. Significant funds does go into the investing and monitoring our contaminated sites, but there are regulatory requirements around those with the Department of Water and Environment Regulation, but the city does have a funding source there which is raised through the Contaminated Sites Levy. Waste Avoidance and Resource Recovery Levy. My apologies.
Councillor Ritchie?
Thanks, through the chair. And I guess it's a spin-off from that. I remember when we first spoke about this, one of the reasons for looking at the solar farm there was the notion that it was a contaminated site and we didn't want to have to do anything else with it. So I was perhaps a little bit surprised that we obviously now have to undertake the contamination. I guess that's fair enough, but I'm just wondering, we don't really know what sort of costs involved in that, and I guess that could be either to Peter or Brett.
Through the chair, contaminated sites are by definition Pandora's box. We don't know what's underground until we start investigating, and the detailed site investigations and the like provide us information, and we deal with the information that comes to hand and the requirements that come through our contaminated site investigations and recommendations from environmental and geological experts that provide us advice as to what we need to do with those sites to manage the impacts, be it gas. But also looking at the potential for using the land that is the contaminated sites are on for alternative purposes such as the solar farm, or for the instance in Brown Road is another example for potential playing fields.
And just as a supplemental to the Director's response, having to understand what the conditions are allows us to reduce one of the risks of the construction of the site. What would happen if we just need to understand what level of subsidence is maintained there. One of the things in the feasibility study is the system proposed by NHAR is actually panel on sleds on the ground, compared to traditional systems that excavate the cabling and all the footings and everything. So they're cognizant of the fact that the ground itself may not be virgin native soil, for want of a term.
Yeah, just a couple of follow-up questions if I can. Is it a tracking system or is it fixed?
That will be determined during the detailed design phase in terms of cost-benefit analysis.
And finally, first of all, I'd just like to congratulate you on the initiative. I think it's fabulous. And can we have a guarantee it will be in the shape of a giant gum nut, please?
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brett, you mentioned the footprint smaller. Do you know roughly what the footprint is? And it might be in the report, but I don't remember seeing it.
Through the chair, can I take that on notice and come back and I'll advise council?
Okay. And the follow-up question is, so there's going to be a community engagement plan or a process that's going to underway. What's the nature of that? Is it asking what are your thoughts on a solar farm, or because obviously there's no detailed design, it's obviously just testing the waters?
Through the chair, we have previously engaged with the community in the sustainability survey to gauge the community's views on sustainable energy, etc., and we've got quite a lot of support for the concept of solar. We believe this level of engagement will be dealing with the actual site selection and what issues surround the site selection and any impacts that we haven't forecast from people regarding that proposed site.
I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, is it then premature to start a community engagement plan given that we've got a number of obstacles that we need to overcome, and we could be creating a false sense of something which may not eventuate?
Thank you. Through the chair, we see having the community engagement underway and completed as actually one quiver in one bow in the quiver of dealing with all the outstanding risks. If we find that there is a significant community backlash, we need to understand that sooner rather than later.
And is there any indication as to why you think there would be a significant community Douglas?
I have no feel for that in that regard. Personally speaking, there shouldn't be, but until we understand what the community are thinking, I couldn't sort of be definite in that regard.
And I'm going to be indulgent and ask one more question. So in terms of the reflectors and their location so close to the airport, are there any concerns by through aviation?
Okay, I know what I've got this. First of all, they're not reflectors. They absorb sunlight. They don't reflect per se. That's their whole reason for being, is to not be reflective. In the pre-feasibility study, we undertook a bit of a research, and there is a solar farm at Karratha Airport on airport land. The discussions we've had with Perth Airport, quite rightly, they believe it doesn't compromise their plans for the new runway. The Civil Aviation Safety Authority would have the final say in terms of disrupting approaches by pilots. They don't believe it is an issue, but until such time as they've got a fully worked up proposal to consider, I can't be definite in that regard, but it appears that it shouldn't be a problem because it's sufficiently to the east and in its proximity to the runway ends that shouldn't present a problem for approaching aircraft.
That's great, thank you very much for that. Sorry, Councillor Cooper in the corner does have a question. My apologies, Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Through the chair. I'm just wondering if for any reason the site at Pioneer Park, due to say contamination, is not suitable, could somewhere else be looked at?
We've exhausted ourselves as to readily accessible land that doesn't involve changing hands with money. But if that wasn't going to be a constraint, I'm sure we could procure some land elsewhere in the city for such a farm. The issue would be then finding proximity to the Western Power network. That's one of the benefits of Pioneer. It's close to the zone substation.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to ask Doug Bartlett, Manager Asset Planning, to come back up. Thank you, to discuss parking concerns for Whistle Park Gully and Mundy Regional Park.
Good evening again, councillors and staff and members of the public. We may be, or councillors may be aware of the range of parking concerns that have arisen through the COVID-19 pandemic period, and recently a lot of people wanting to access national parks, parking in local streets and so on, causing concern for local residents. This is looking at those issues around Whistle Park Gully and the Mundy Regional Park. So as a background, we've had this increasing number and intensity of complaints around those local roads, in particular Orange Valley Road at the western end, Lewis Road and Forestfield at the northern end, and also a little bit on Falls Road adjacent to the Lesmedi Falls. The Mundy Regional Park is managed by the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions, and there is limited parking, although they do have 3 parking areas, 1 sealed and 2 gravel. Those 2 gravel areas were formed by the Friends of Upper Lesmedi Falls in 2015, and in recent times the city has written to 2 ministers and a member for Forestfield, I think it is, requesting assistance in addressing parking concerns around the area, but no commitments have been made. This is just a brief map. The green line through the middle, hopefully members of the public can see that in the back, shows the Whistle Park Gully walk. The areas in yellow on the left and the right represent those 2 street ends where the parking has been in high demand. The Orange Valley Road on the right side of the picture has no formal parking available, so people just park on the street. And then for Lewis Road, there is a very small parking area within the regional park, which becomes full very quickly. Falls Road and Lesmedi Falls is down below the picture. These are pictures taken by a resident of Orange Valley Road prior to us installing a bunch of new parking controls, which looks like this. So we have, in addition to installing parking control signs on both sides, have also put the yellow lines down to really reinforce, which is already requirements under the Road Traffic Code not to park in certain places. Just as a note, this is not to try and say that those were effective. There are still people parking even in contravention of all that signage and lines. So this is a picture provided by another resident for Falls Road, and showing a really big problem there. And then again, we've installed a reinforcing of that yellow line there to reinforce no stopping, even though anyone parking on the footpath or in that lane would actually be contravening the Road Traffic Code because they're not allowing people to pass. This is Lewis Road towards the end. The left picture is, or in fact they're both looking to the north. It's a rather steeper gradient. It's very limited pavement width, and people, if they do park on both sides without any parking controls, will block the street. That was one of the main concerns raised through the consultation. We've installed parking signs now for what's on the left side, the west side of that picture, to try and guide people to park only on the one side of the road, which then just leaves enough room for a lane of traffic to be able to get through. On the right hand side, however, there's a bit of a deep drainage ditch, and so it's very difficult to squeeze further over without some major civil works. So I've just outlined all those parking controls that have recently been implemented. There's still a number of people wanting to access the parks. I'm not sure where they're going now, so I'm sure we'll be getting other feedback from other roads in due course. And the DBCA have advised they have a small amount of funds, so they'll be looking at improvement. Just a minor correction, however, it's only Lewis Road which they're looking at. They're not looking at Falls Road. And then there's also some activity across the state with large packets of funding being made available in other areas. Around the Kalamunda Circuit area. So the city sent out some letters to 400 metre radius of ends of Lewis Road and Orange Valley Road to seek community feeling on sentiment on this. 42 responses agreed there was a problem. There was a mixed response as to whether or not on-street parking should be provided. As a general sentiment, residents support people wanting to access the park, but they have concern about some individual behaviour and the impact to their local amenity and life. So we've outlined 10 options. Some of them can be taken in conjunction with each other that could be considered. We are going to proceed with option 7, which we'll list in our capital works program for constructing a formal cul-de-sac at the end of Lewis Road, because it requires it anyway. It's simply a dead end with a bunch of driveways coming off it at the moment. So it doesn't provide a turnaround space for people trying to get down there. The recommendation we'll be asking council to support is to take up option 10, which is about forming an advocating group. And this is on the basis that we've already undertaken a large number of changes as outlined before. Are there any questions?
Councillors, any questions? Councillor O'Donnell?
Thank you. I'm just wondering, do councils make use, I mean, apart from the City of Perth, for towing cars away? I mean, because I note that there was quite a few residents that were just blocked off from getting out of their house, and that'd make me pretty cross.
Could I get the Director of Development Services to assist with that?
Through the Chair, could you please rephrase the question?
Tow away, you know, take car, tow away if you park in a no parking area, you know, they just come and grab your car and take it away.
Through the Chair, our enforcement policy doesn't contain provisions around towing. It does contain a gradual approach with the issuing of cautions and fines depending on the nature of the offence. If a car is parked on a footpath and it's clearly creating a safety issue for pedestrians, then the enforcement policy talks to the issuing of fines in the first instance, where there's parking that's not in accordance with the parking local law, and that parking doesn't necessarily have the characteristics of causing pedestrian safety and the like, cautions are issued. So there is a gradual approach to fines under the enforcement management procedures that doesn't contain the towing of vehicles.
Okay, so I guess the question I'm asking is could it be a possibility, do we know of other areas? I mean, like I said, it's an emergency situation where you see that car in the middle of both the roads and you think, well, if there was a fire, you know, most people probably aren't likely to do it more than one time, but if they know that people are serious, it's just more of a question. Not saying I intend to tow people's cars, but it was just more of a question. Could the city, or does the city know of other councils that may do that?
Through the chair, the city is aware that other councils do that, and my understanding is that we do have the powers to do so, and it just came to my mind that we did have a situation where there was a need for a ambulance to access a site during an event, and we were in the process of calling a tow truck to move the vehicle, but the person did arrive just before the tow truck was actioned, and that was moved. So the city does have provision, and in certain circumstances, be it an emergency or the like, suitable action would be taken.
Councillor Ritchie?
Is it reasonable to assume that most of these problems have arisen because of when we were allowed out from COVID? Were the same things evident before we were inundated with people from the flats coming up to the hills? And would we envisage, as we're allowed out of the state eventually, that it may in fact subside?
The problems were known to exist prior. We've got a bit of a history of several years of complaints, probably not to the scale of the most recent development, and yes, we'd anticipate a decline as people move to other places. However, they've also become familiar with these walks and so may want to come back.
Thank you. Councillor Stella.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. In actual fact, it may be noted for councillors that a lot of the people on the top side of it, on the Orange Valley Road, in actual fact, a lot of the people were from the area. We're actually from the city of Kalamunda and up in the hills in particular. It'd be interesting to see how many people may keep on wanting to walk when we start getting into summer. Well, it may drop off. My question though is, at the end of the Orange Valley Road site, there is a large area of land, and I know they've shown no inclination, the department, to develop that site for parking. It's an amazing large flattish area of land which would be great for parking. All they needed to do was put a gate on it, or put a which would say lock at say 7 o'clock at night, and if you're not out by then, a bit of bad luck. Something like that. And the other mention was something about a toilet, and I remember one of the rougher standards is a bush toilet, or what they call in some circles the long drop. But I'm wondering, why are they reluctant to even develop that, or even contemplate the whole idea of enhancing, improving the parking around to the level that they probably should be, because it's their park, and in a sense it's partly a consequence of people wanting to be here and in the area, and a lot more walking and a better lifestyle. It just seems to be they're a little reluctant to get involved or to take it on.
Thank you, through the chair. So we had a few discussions with the DBCA regarding this at different times, and reinforced the desire to look at that lot of land, which would appear to provide good parking facility. The feedback has been consistent. They believe that's a little bit too isolated. There's a danger of lack of passive surveillance to manage any kind of crime and things that could happen in that area. There's also feedback through our community survey which indicated the residents wouldn't be too keen on that. They wouldn't want us to have more people parking up the back of the Whistlepipe Gully. Now, in context of what DBCA are doing elsewhere, it's probably a case of they're simply having to divert resources across the wider state. There's so many other parks and things where the demand for access has increased as well.
Through the chair, if I might add to that, that's why we're forming a recommendation that an advocacy program be undertaken with a working group that at senior level, at state, including ministerial as well as departmental bureaucrats, we work through these issues, because whilst the officer level in DBCA have identified some roadblocks. We understand that perhaps through some strong advocacy and roundtable discussions, we should be able to come forward with a plan that matches everyone's aspirations.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Doug, I just want to take you back to a comment about the results of the survey. Looking at the results, one of the questions, question 2 was, I am supportive of on-street parking. Agree or strongly disagree was 24, and disagree and strongly disagree was 29. So that's not really an overwhelming position on that one. And the next question, I have no issues with walkers parking to go to Mundy Regional Park. Agree was 30, disagree was 20. I haven't actually gone through the comment by comment, but are you getting a sense that, or can you tell me where the information is that says that the community are not supportive of some of the options? In terms of the community not supportive of increasing access to this area, to the walking trail and stuff like that.
Through the chair, we might pass that to Ms O'Neill, who is actually best placed to answer that question at this stage.
Thank you very much. I'll just clarify one point to start with. We specifically consulted in that 400-metre radius of landowners. So landowners haven't been consulted in relation to the 10 options that you've got here before you. So I just wanted to clarify that, because it appeared that it was being suggested that they may or may not be supportive of those options. Certainly they may be supportive of some. What the consultation showed us is that there certainly were some community members who were significantly opposed to on-street parking, but there were also, as you're picking up in the results, and it's a very small sample size as well because it was geographically based of those residents who lived in that immediate vicinity, there were a number who were open to that idea. And I think that part of the reason that the officers have phrased the recommendation in the way that they have is because we acknowledge that the current interim measures that have been put in place to deal with the residents who were very vocal and had significant concerns about on-street parking and also had concerns around emergency access and safety needed to be addressed while we then look at the longer-term solution, because longer-term it does suggest in some cases that some residents are open to the idea of on-street parking, very much like you would see in a lot of the western suburbs, for example. But I think we need to do more work in understanding with the community what may and may not be appropriate, because some of what we were seeing was, as Councillor O'Donnell alluded to, blocking of access and just kind of total disregard to where there were driveways and overall structure. So yes, the results do suggest that some community members are supportive, but some are also really heavily opposed, and I know a number of those residents actually contacted councillors directly. Certainly at an officer level we spent many hours both in-person meetings and on the phone with residents, particularly on Orange Valley Road.
Thank you. Follow-up question?
Yep, one last question and then I'll move to Councillor O'Donnell.
I've got a couple of follow-up questions, but happy to tic-tac. The question is, so in option 8, it talks about DBCA are not supportive of expanding parking at Lewis or Orange Valley Road. Do you know what the limitation is? Is it resources? Is it the process to reclaim land? Do you know what the reason is for that position?
Yes, through the chair, we had some very brief discussions around what the issues might be. They're concerned with any impact to the natural environment, the vegetation and so on. There are significant topography constraints to those sites and the cost associated with that.
Sorry, I'm going to go over to Councillor O'Donnell and I'll come back to you, Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that there is actually a agenda item ongoing with WowGirl about a working group with representation from local governments in relation to regional parks and other landowners in relation to site security, environmental damage, vandalism and antisocial behaviour. So it's probably a good opportunity to tap in and see where that is at, because that was actually introduced in July as an actionable item from the zone of Kwinana, I think it was. Yeah.
Is just a follow-up question for that one, is that an option in terms of the motion going before council, that we actually tack on to the back of what already is occurring, and has that been explored?
Through the chair, I wasn't aware of that particular action. It, however, sounds like it's more security oriented, so it may not solve our wider access tourism type questions that we're dealing with. But however, we'll look at that, see if that's a viable solution.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you know the number of parking infringements that have been issued recently around this area?
Thank you through the chair. In the report, we've provided a report up to middle of September when the report was written, which is in paragraph 26. Would you like me to refer to? Yeah, that probably could be updated. If you would like some updated data, we'll get some updates.
Councillors, any further questions? I'd like to make some of my own observations and comments and ask some questions. I am a little bit confused as to the outcome, and I'd like to have those 10 points put up again, if I may, so we can see the 10 options that were put up previously on the screen, please. Yep. Because originally the complaint actually stemmed from Orange Valley Road, yet the resolutions appears to be leaning towards Lewis Road. The pictures that were provided for Lewis Road was looking at the road in a northerly direction, when actually Lewis Road goes down in a circular direction. It goes northeast, and then it goes into almost like a cul-de-sac area already. So I'm a little bit confused as to why it's being portrayed in that manner. Given that the concerns and the initial complaints were in relation to Orange Valley Road, why is the resolution for Lewis Road?
Thank you. Through the chair, there's a couple of different questions which I'll deal with in due course. So the reason being that the only formal parking for Whistlepipe Gully is at the Lewis Road end, and through DBCA and through the Minister have requested that we only advertise that as the access point for the gully, because there is no formal parking at the Orange Valley Road end. So yes, although the majority of the work was initiated relating to the Orange Valley Road residents, there were also complaints from Lewis Road residents at the same time. Now, in relation to the orientation of Lewis Road, in the map, it swings to the northeast. At the end, not showing in this diagram, unfortunately, but it is in the attachment with the cul-de-sac design. The road reserve ends abruptly with a couple of accesses to private property. And on the right hand, or on the east of that, is the car park, which is within the DBCA land. So that's separate to the road, and so people driving down there can't turn around if the car park's full. So we're looking at creating a cul-de-sac to actually create a proper end to the road, and then people will be able to turn around and so on.
I would just like to express my dissatisfaction at this result. It doesn't actually deal with the systemic issues that we're facing as a city, particularly because our borders are closed. People are looking to wander out yonder, and that literally means that there are more visitors. And given that there is no other option, I think that it's appropriate that our parks, our national parks, have the resources that they need to function and to be safe. So I have significant safety concerns in terms of Orange Valley Road, and I don't think that we've addressed those. Given I understand that DBCA is stating that they want people to use Lewis Road, but it's too late because there's the internet, and the internet refers people to to Orange Valley Road, so that's already actually in effect. And I think it's too late. And the issues that we face at the zigzag, that we face at Whistlepipe Gully, at Lions Lookout, they're all very consistent, and I think that we need an overall approach to deal with them. And I am disappointed with this result, because it doesn't actually deal with the issues that we're facing on Orange Valley Road. Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a follow-up question on my previous question. Given that we, in the last 2 years, have issued 249 parking infringements, is the officer confident that this is the best way that we can find a solution for this area and not turn away any potential tourists and investment in our city by issuing more infringements? Is this the most effective way to achieve an outcome where people can visit our city and walk and then maybe spend some money in our area?
Thank you. Through the Chair, we've recommended what we believe is the most appropriate option to move forward with this. Yes, it is not a good solution. We haven't solved all the parking problems. We haven't solved all the access problems. We do want to promote tourism. The question would be, does the city want to commit to a higher level of funding and perhaps look at some of those other options, providing actually more parking infrastructure? Those are all options are all available, and we can even expand on that if there are some other ideas that would like to be promoted.
Sorry, through the chair, I think there's an issue here with overall direction. So we're now talking about the outcome of these areas being a tourism destination. However, on the other hand, we're also trying to deal with the local community who don't want tourism. So, Council, you have got a polarised, difficult situation here, and you can't have both. It's got to kind of be one or the other. So you'll need to give us some direction in the next couple of weeks as to what is the outcome that you want to achieve through these processes, because I'm hearing conflicting views.
I just want a point of clarification as well, if I may. In terms of parking options, my understanding is that the land is owned, where those parking options would be available, the land is owned by state government. So is that actually an option for the City of Kalamunda?
I'm sure by negotiation and if the city was willing to provide funding towards parking infrastructure, we would be able to find more solutions.
Just, can I ask a question, sorry, through the chair?
Yeah, Councillor Stella.
Taking on board what the CEO's just said, I suppose, and this probably would go through to Ms O'Neill, to Nicole, are we advertising, in essence, on Facebook or on our site? Are we advertising that this is available through the city, the walks and going there? And what they've claimed to me before, some of the residents, is that you can go on site and see that they've recommended the Orange Valley Road as the starting point for it. So maybe it's something that we as a council maybe need to look at to say, are we about promoting something like this that is potentially going to create problems?
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you very much. So just to confirm, the city has for more than 10 years promoted a number of walks throughout the city of Kalamunda. In relation to this one specifically, up until about 18 months ago, it listed both locations. The city reviewed that decision at an exec level prior to the matter coming to council and actually stopped in any way advertising the fact that you could get access at Orange Valley. The city never promoted parking at Orange Valley, but it did note that they were the two entrances, like the two potential start points of the walk. We also went out of our way, because it's not just the City of Kalamunda that had this site listed. There were numerous sites, more than 20 in actual fact, that were promoting the state government's walk. We went out of our way and actually contacted those organisations as well in discussions with the state to actually look to get as many as possible advertising the start of the walk at Lewis. But the reality is we're practically not promoting it at all at the moment. We're trying to not promote that site because there's also limited parking at Lewis Road. So we're looking to avoid promotion at all. And I have noted that there are a number of other entrances to national parks within the City of Kalamunda that also have as limited facilities, including the end of Spring Road, which is also the entrance to the Bibbulmun Track. And Mr Bartlett has touched on the issues that we've got
at Les Murdy Falls, which is promoted and has the most infrastructure out of all of our sites, but still isn't handling capacity. And these aren't just COVID-related issues.
If I could just have a follow-up question for you, please, Manager. Just in terms of, obviously we have our own sites that we manage, but there's a whole range of sites that we don't have control of, and once those things go viral, our capacity to control that messaging online is actually quite limited, and certainly from what I see, is that it's promoted widely, which is a great thing for our city, but not if we then don't have the infrastructure to support that level of promotion. So I just want to be clear that I understand that the City of Kalamunda aren't the ones who are promoting it. It's actually gone out more widely into other online groups, etc., and Facebook pages, and we don't have any control over that. Just another question, though, if I could just direct it to yourself again. In terms of the safety and surveillance issues that were raised by DBCA at the end of Orange Valley Road, are they any different to the current passive surveillance, for instance, at Lions Lookout, Jorgensen Park, PC Brook? How is it that the Orange Valley Road is any different to any of these other sites?
Thank you, Chairperson. I think they'd be fairly similar, actually. They're all reasonably isolated and possibly similar exposure, apart from Jorgensen Park, which is far more popular, I think, and has a lot of local residents that access it directly.
Through the Chair, if I could also emphasise that it was the opinion of DBCA citing their passive surveillance issues they would have if car parking and facilities were created inside their land, not on Orange Valley Road. Just to make that definition very clear, it's their opinion. The city has not assessed from a SEPTED any proposal for car parking inside State Forest, National Park. Sorry, that's the DBCA have advised us as the landowner, land controller. That's their view.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. And lastly, hopefully this one won't be quite as contentious, Doug, Canning Road road safety investigation, please.
Good evening again. So now this study arose through safety concerns raised by the community and through our consultant as part of our bicycle planning work in 2017, which was then adopted in 2018. Canning Road itself has been used by RAV as in road train vehicles prior to 2006, but became a RAV route in 2006 when Main Roads assigned that category to it. And the other part of the key history for the Council to consider here is that there is a desire to reassign Canning Road responsibility from Welshpool Road to its southern boundary to Main Roads as part of their reclassification process, where they review road functions and determine that some roads need to become under their management due to their, I guess, scale and size of function. So the city appointed Donald Veal Consultants under quotation process to produce this road safety investigation. It was to produce schematic diagrams only and high-level costings, so you don't see concept designs. That was deliberate. We wanted to keep the scope of the work as simple as possible and get a scale of the range of treatments needed. So as part of their study, now this company does do road safety audits, which are very detailed. However, in this case, they pulled back a bit on that detail, but they do have that technical expertise. And they identified a range of items which I'm sure anyone who's driven down there would be familiar with. The lack of formed shoulders where the verges drop away or rise up very quickly from the edge of the road. There are trees and vegetation very near to the edge of the road seal. We have the steep batters, as I mentioned, problems with street lighting being inconsistent, guideposts in poor locations, and a range of other rigid structures in what we call the clear zone. The clear zone being an area where if you were you were to lose control of your vehicle, you should be able to recover control and or stop safely off the edge of the road. And so, for example, in a 50 kilometre or 60 kilometre per hour zone, we would want to have 3 metres space available off the side of the road where a vehicle could stop safely. In these higher speed zones, we're talking 4.5, 5 or even wider spaces. So as part of the work, DVC provided cross-sections and estimated scale of costs. The main treatment, as expected, involves widening of the road because it is narrow, has very little shoulders, and either removing some of those hazards or providing protection through guardrails. These are pictures of Canning Road. So this is section DD in the study. We are here south of Welchpool Road looking north on Canning Road. The centre picture looks fairly ordinary and fine, except that the left and the right verges drop away very dramatically. There's less than a metre of shoulder on the right hand side, and you drop down about 3 metres immediately off the sides. That's considered to be a hazard and would normally require guard railing under the standards. And on the left side it's almost identical with a creek running through there. This is an example, this is section DD, a cross-section proposed with the study where they were suggesting that we would actually widen the road on the right-hand side and put in a barrier because it still drops away even with a retaining wall. And on the left side, we would want to fill it in and provide a much wider space and then also widen the road. A key feature of the study and an objective of the study was to try and provide better cycling safety. So we have bicycle lanes identified as a shoulder treatment on each side of the road, 1.8 metres wide. So we get nice wide 3.6 metre lanes and 1.8 metre lanes on the side for just a shoulder treatment which cyclists can ride on. This section FF is at the Leota property, the orchards. Now here we have really nice verges, nice and flat, except that there are still some rigid hazards such as that great big power pole on the right hand side in the picture. This is looking west from the Leota orchards, and this is an example of what that might look like if we proceeded to improve the road there with some geometry improvements for the curve of the road, because the curve is very sharp and the access ways, and then there's an issue with the speed limits as well. Much further south of Pickering Brook Road, this picture was taken at for section II looking north. There's a dip in the road here with curbing each side. The problem with the curbing for cyclists is it makes it very difficult for them to leave the edge of the road if they want to be safe away from the heavy trucks that are coming through and the general traffic. Not such dramatic problems with the verges each side, but it still does drop away, and a cross-section design suggests that we would put in some barriers, perhaps to go around trees we want to protect on the right, and perhaps fill and remove some other trees and vegetation on the left. So that all of that detail will be determined later on in due course through detailed design. Now the report identified and recommended speed limit reductions to 70 kilometres per hour along the length. The city's not sure that that would get approval through Main Roads WA, who manage the speed zoning process. We're currently doing traffic counts south of Pickering Brook Road to see what the traffic behaviour is like. It is likely that the best result we would get is 80 south of the Hills storage area, and the rest we would be seeking 70 kilometres per hour, and I've worked out the time frame for that. I think it was 29-second additional. It's identified in the report anyway in the terms of what delay that would occur for normal traffic if they were travelling the full length. Total value of work, and this is very broad budgeting, so will require some refinement as designs proceed, of $6.6 million worth of work. The timing of this was fortunate in that we were able to use recommendations for our black spot submission, and that's a Australian black spot submission of 1.0 million. If that's approved, that's 100% funded, and it picks up a whole lot of issues between Welchpool Road East and Glenila Road. There are some improvements which we want to proceed with now. We'll continue to look at the intersections that were raised and the vegetation concerns that can be managed in the short term. In the long term, the recommendation or suggestion is not to proceed with major further improvements due to the eventual transfer of responsibility to Main Roads WA.
Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Ritchie?
Thank you. Through the chair, I did notice that the background talked about concerning road cycling safety along Canning Road and Mundaring Road. And my ongoing concerns are the cyclists coming up Mundaring Road, particularly on Saturday and Sunday. And I don't know about the cyclists as far out as where we're talking about. Maybe they are going out there. I haven't seen a lot, but perhaps they are. But certainly the Mundaring Road one continues to be a problem. Did we look to address that as well, or are we dealing with Canning Road first?
Yes, so Canning Road is first on the list. This current financial year will be proceeding with a similar level of investigation for Mundaring Road. The cycle training route's a very attractive area with the hills here. The bicycle plan showed mapping of the attraction of those training routes. It's just quite incredible. And in fact, I had a staff member today commenting about Ridge Hill Road as well. So yeah, it's an ongoing problem of very narrow roads and not good facilities.
Councillor Blair, you have a question?
Yes, just recently noticed and heard of semis and double Bs continuing past Canning Road and onto Pickering Brook Road, and they're missing the turn-off coming along Canning Road to turn right onto Canning Road that heads towards Brookton Highway. At that intersection, there is no truck route yellow sign, as there is truck route yellow signs at the top of Welshpool Road directing trucks to turn right there, but there is a sign missing from that right-hand turn, and once the trucks head down Pickering Brook Road, there is nowhere for them to turn around, and they are actually going all the way to the end of Pickering Brook Road. So I'd recommend if we could try and work out, get a yellow truck route sign put in at that turn off. I'll send an email, as I have taken photos yesterday.
Thank you. Yes, we'll action that.
Councillor O'Connor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just trying to find in the report where it talks about the funding. So obviously there's $1 million for already targeting some of these works. So there's $5 million left to fund, and then it talks about the road being handed over to Main Roads WA, and we wouldn't have to fund. So I'm just trying to be, I want to be clear about what the expectation is of council to fund from Muni, and what part of that's going to be grant funded. And I understand a few years ago the council did some work widening. Councillor Fernie moved to have some work done to widen the road south of yes. So this seems to be an extension of that. Once this $6 million is spent, where's the next point? And obviously Councillor Ritchie has raised Mundaring Road. Do we actually know the value of all of the works in all of the roads, including Ridge Hill Road, that the cities in Kalamunda has to front up to cater for the cyclists who train?
Thank you. Through the chair, because of the level of detail in the attached road safety investigation, I did not report on all the financial measures in the council report. Apologies for that. However, they are in a, I don't recall the page number, there's just one page with all of the projects identified and scoped. Again, those are very high level estimates, so they're just an indication. In terms of future actions, we were already investigating a further section of Canning Road as a potential black spot submission. So there's likely that there will be black spot funding also available for that section. Should again the council wish us to proceed with that work in light of the future change of responsibility. Having said that, even if Main Roads do take responsibility for the road, there is nothing stopping us proposing a project and seeking to make improvements with their support. Where we deem necessary. In terms of Mundaring Road, no idea of the scope of that level of work. there already are a number of guardrail treatments, so it could be that the cost is less. However, the question would be, at what extent do we need to widen the road? We already know that there was a very expensive black spot project there just a couple of years ago due to motorbike fatalities. And then we have the wider Bickley area and Carmel areas where a number of roads could have improvements. So at the moment we couldn't say what the level of cost would be.
Thank you. Just as a supplemental to that, through the chair, basically as funding permits through our budget process, we try and undertake these studies and come up with what are the long-term financial plan implications for road improvements as we can. They are expensive pieces of work to undertake each and every year. So to get a to have a whole of city approach in a short time will be a big ask of council and ratepayers. So we believe taking the prioritised approach of one major stretch of road at a time each financial year is prudent.
Just a point of clarity. Oh, sorry, Councillor Billich, do you have a question or no? Okay, just a point of clarity. In terms of the upgrading of the roads for cyclists, my understanding is that these upgrades are occurring for all vehicles which utilise the road and to make the use of those roads safe for all users. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. One of the reasons for that is the funding sources for cycle infrastructure are limited to more metropolitan-oriented and destination-oriented, and there's simply nothing available for this kind of training route. So we aim to make an improvement that suits all road users, and in this case, the cyclists, particularly providing a wide sealed shoulder for them to have space to ride in.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? Are councillors in need of a break, or are you happy to continue? Keep going? Okay, thank you. Just let me know if a break's required. Okay, we're now moving on to a presentation by Director of Asset Services, Community Appointment to Kalamunda Environment Advisory Committee. That is a confidential item. We might move that to the back.
Through the chair, the nominees' details are confidential. If council wish to discuss the nominees' details, we will need to move behind closed doors, but if they want to discuss the substance of the presentation, that can be proceeded with in the public forum.
Yeah, if you're happy to do the presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is twofold, is to appoint a community member to the Kalamunda Environmental Advisory Committee, also known as KIAC, to fill vacancy, and to amend the terms of reference of KIAC to have 7 community members instead of 8. After the 2-year elections, we reconvene all our advisory committees, and at the October 2009 council meetings, due to the expressions of interest shown by the community to join KIAC, council determined to grow its membership from 6 to 8 members, and community members were appointed on that basis. Subsequently, we have received 2 resignations from KIAC from community members, including, I'm very, very sad to say, our presiding member, Mr. Kevin Goss's last meeting will be Thursday night. Having received an earlier resignation, we sought expressions of interest from the community, from any community members wishing to join KIAC. We received 1 nomination. The nomination it would be, in our opinion, a worthy member of KIAC. So it's proposed then to appoint this nominee to KIAC. However, from a good governance perspective, we then reset under the terms of reference of KIAC back to 7 community members, noting that KIAC has traditionally operated with 6. So that's the substance of the report, that the nominee, as set out in the confidential attachment, is appointed to KIAC, and the terms of reference are amended to reflect 7 community members.
Councillors, do you have any questions? I do have a question, but I'll wait till afterwards to ask that question because it's confidential. Thank you. Okay, and if I could now call on Director of Corporate Services, Gary Tyses, to provide his report on the City's Economic Development Advisory Committee, please.
Through the Chair, good evening, councillors, members of the public and staff. I have three presentations for you this evening. The first one is the proposed membership of the City's Economic Development Advisory Committee. Similar to the earlier presentation from Director Asset Services, details of the nominations for that committee are confidential. So questions around that nature we would need to move to confidentiality. But similarly, I'm more than happy to talk about the process and where we've landed in that space. The second item was the Les Murdy School Library Management Committee, and the third item was the Public Art Master Plan, scheduled to go out for public advertising. So without further ado, I will jump on to the first report, the proposed membership of the Economic Development Advisory Committee. Councillors will recall the purpose of this report was to appoint the nominations to be on the Economic Development Advisory Committee, to adopt the revised terms of reference for the committee, and to request the CEO to write to all nominees advising of the council's determination. So, by way of background, Council established the Economic Development Advisory Committee as a new committee of council at its meeting on the 25th of February this year, and adopted an original terms of reference. Subsequent to that, the call for inviting nominations to the Advisory Committee opened on Tuesday the 9th of July and closed on Tuesday the 4th of August. And applications, or I should say applicants, were assessed against the selection criteria specified within the City's Advisory Committee policy. In doing that assessment, the City was very fortunate to receive a number of very high calibre candidates that had significant industry and commerce experience and a great depth of knowledge, experience and skills in the area. So, just taking you back to the committee objectives, the committee objectives were to promote the economic development vision for the city, to assist in fostering very strong relationships with ED stakeholders, peak bodies and government agencies, to provide advice on current initiatives or gaps in the economic development area, and also to advise council regarding the overall implementation of, and so I should say implementation and renewal of the city's economic development strategy. I reference the fact that we've put before you this evening a revised terms of reference, and I just want to talk to that briefly. The original terms of reference, as adopted back in 25th of February, contained up to 14 members in the total, but when you went down and looked at the subtotal, the actual subtotal was 11, so there was an inconsistency between the total number and the subset. So, in accordance with that, the City has recommended that we revise the terms of reference down to a membership of no less than 8, and the composition of which is 2 elected members, no less than 5 representatives from the City of Kalamunda business and industry sectors, 1 rep from the Chamber of Commerce, and predominantly, as I say, the reason for suggesting the revised terms of reference before you this evening are to bring into line that inconsistency in the number, but also to promote and assist with some more streamlined and efficient operations. And I'll just draw your attention, we've heard tonight about a few of the other advisory committees before council. By way of comparison, KEAC, as we've just heard, has 7 members, recommending 7. Arts is 11, tourism 10. So getting a right-sized committee is really important. but equally and more importantly is getting the right people on that committee. And as I say, we were very fortunate that we were able to attract certainly some good quality members. So, by way of recommendations, it's recommended that Council notes the nominations received from applications on the City's Development Advisory Committee, and you'll see that assessment in the confidential attachment. Appoint the nominations as per confidential attachment 2, adopt the revised terms of reference which I've just spoken about, and also request the Chief Executive Officer to write to all of those nominees advising of Council's determination. So in closing, it's the City's view that the nominated members bring a great depth of knowledge, skills and experience which will certainly be very valuable as we work our way into this really important role and sector.
Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Ritchie?
Thanks. And this may need to go behind closed doors a little bit later, but I just had one thing I did want to mention. I take your point about the inconsistency, and it obviously added up to 11 and not 14. I guess my disappointment is that there is no longer any reference to 2 small or medium enterprises. And again, I don't want to go into who's on there and so on, but given that we know across Australia that the majority of people are employed in small businesses or by small businesses, and a lot of our areas across the city are owned and operated, and I'm concerned that we're not actually trying to encourage them. I'm not in any way having a go at the people who've nominated, but I would have thought that given the nature of our city, that I'd like to look at the possibility of having at least one part of that membership, because obviously a little ago as February we thought it was a good idea to actually nominate people from different groups, and yet we've gone away from that. And I would just like to reiterate the possibility of maybe nominating at least someone from small industry.
Through the
chair, doesn't the Chamber of Commerce represent small business?
Yeah.
And that was their role?
That was the intent, and without getting into specifics, unfortunately, but one of the other entities represented also does a lot of work with small business coaching and the like. So, but I'm happy to discuss that. I can't obviously go into that group in this space.
Yeah, look, I took the point, but there could be a point where there could be no small business people on there, depending on who might have nominated. It was more that in February we thought it was a good idea to have all these groups, and now we don't. And so it was about trying to get that diversity, and the committee's never even met, and yet we've completely changed it. If we thought it was a good idea in February, I'm just wondering why we've gone away from that. That's really my point. Obviously we thought it was a good idea to have some diversity, and now apparently we don't.
Yeah. Well, so through the chair, if I may, I think when you, I've got to be careful not to speak about the confidential. When you actually delve into,
Actually, sorry, I think it would be worthwhile us discussing this quite openly behind closed doors. So I'm going to leave it at this point in time because I think we probably do need to delve into it a little bit deeper.
Yeah,
I'm going to leave it to the end. Thanks.
That'd be very helpful. Thanks.
Okay, if we could move on to Les Moody School Community Library Management Committee, please.
Okay, so my second report was for Council to approve a minor amendment to the membership provisions of the terms of reference for the Les Moody School Community Library. And so this has been necessitated out of some organisational changes that occurred previously. Libraries sat in community development and Darren Jones's area. You'll recall last year they moved across into my area under the commercial and cultural services area. So this particular report is to tidy up the membership in the terms of reference, and the recommendation is to approve the appointment of Andre Stoit, who's our Manager Commercial and Cultural Services, also Brittany Cover, who many of you are familiar with, and Rosalie Foss, who's a Kalamunda Branch librarian. So any questions on that? It's Rosalie, I'm sorry. Yep. If there's no questions, I'll shift on to the third item. So the third item is Public Art Master Plan. So the purpose of this particular report is for Council to consider adopting a draft City of Kalamunda Public Art Master Plan for the purposes of public advertising. The master plan was prepared and articulates a vision and key thematics around public art, and the master plan is themed around the areas of natural environment, Noongar history and culture, early settlers, and the past, present and future of industry. It kind of grabs everything really, doesn't it? So the Public Art Master Plan was one of the key actions out of the art strategy which you adopted last year. And following from that, the city engaged a consultant by the name of Maggie Baxter in order to prepare that particular master plan. So the recommendation before you tonight, councillors, is that council adopts the draft City of Kalamunda Public Art Master Plan and authorises the city to commence public advertising, which would be open for a period of 28 days.
Councillors, do you have any questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Director. If we could now have presentation by Nicole O'Neill, Manager of Customer and Public Relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The report that I'm presenting to you tonight is in relation to election of the Mayor. So the City of Kalamunda is seeking the opinion of the community on the method of election of the Mayor. Section 2.11 of the Local Government Act 1995 provides the two different methods that I know most of you are aware of in which the Mayor can be elected. So that's either elected by electors of the district, for example, ratepayers and residents, or elected by the council from amongst the councillors. By way of background, as council will be aware, the City of Kalamunda Mayor is currently elected by council every 2 years, following on from the local government elections. At the Ordinary Council meeting, the OCM of the 28th of July, council resolved to request the Chief Executive Officer to prepare a community consultation plan prior to seeking the community's opinion on the mode of election of the Mayor. So the city has prepared that communication and engagement plan, and we have attached a copy of the activity schedule to this particular report. We are proposing an extremely integrated campaign. We're looking at media, social media, digital, website, print advertising, direct mail, with the survey actually going to letterboxes where there is letterbox distribution available, flyers and posters, a questionnaire, shopping centre pop-ups and attendance at community events, council briefings and briefing notes, and the production of an outcome summary report. So you'll be very aware of many of these mechanisms because you'll see those across our integrated marketing and communications plans. In terms of timeframes, as per the activity schedule, we are proposing that we could go live with the campaign following on from the OCM and subject to the decision of council, with a report able to come back either at the end of the year or by February. So the recommendation is for council to endorse the mode of election of the Mayor survey, attachment 1, and the community engagement activity schedule, which is provided in attachment 2, to facilitate the seeking of community opinion on the mode of election of the Mayor. Any questions?
Questions? Councillor Stella.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. I may have missed this particular one, but I have been asked on a few occasions now by a variety of people throughout the community on the costing of electing a mayor. I didn't see it in the preamble that's on both the positive, negative aspects or whatever it may be, the alternatives, but nowhere did I see, is that now been included? I don't know, the costings for a directly elected mayor.
Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Stallard. In relation to the survey, how the mayor should be elected, costing is not included in that regard. The city is proposing that in relation to questions around cost, it could be addressed as a part of a series of FAQs, because in actual fact, it is impossible for the administration to determine what the cost would be. The cost could be determined based on a number of factors, and I know there has been some conversation, however, it's not a part of this current consultation, which talks to the number of councillors, and that is something that will come forward in future discussions and future reports in relation to the number of councillors and the recommendations of the local government review.
A follow-up question to that one. Surely, if we're asking people in the community to make a decision on whether they prefer a directly or indirectly elected mayor, one of the key factors that would come into play is the cost of directly electing a mayor, and surely we could find out that cost by other councils who have directly elected mayors.
If you're referring to costs, for example, the cost for the West Australian Electoral Commission to actually undertake the additional ballot, those particular costs we do have. So I just want to differentiate between if you're talking about the cost to have that role or the cost for the WAEC. I understand cost for the WAEC, we had a look at the Stirling example, and the governance officer might want to make comment in relation to this, and it was approximately $5,000.
Based on the 2019 elections and the return, it's about $5,000 to $8,000. There's no additional cost for posting out because the ballots would go out in the current envelopes that go out anyway, so that'd be covered. So it's only the returns for how many people come back. And based on our returns of about 30-31%, they estimated somewhere around about 5,000 to 8,000.
Follow-up question?
I suppose if I may, I don't want to hold the line right here. I suppose the alternative is as well that it's a difficult one to be asking in the current climate because of or is it a really difficult one? And you've sort of implied that with the government making decisions about the nature and structure of future councils. So we need to have some clarity about whether this is going to be an additional councillor or one less councillor. And I'm just not sure whether we should be in that position. So is it appropriate, I'm going to ask it as a question, is it appropriate that we're going out to the people with all this happening on the local government reform, potentially to alter everything in the whole equation?
Through the chair, Councillor, that's a question that council need to decide. You've given us an instruction to go and do this, and that's really all we can comment on. I don't think we can, go into the question you're asking. That's a question for you and your fellow councillors to determine. So if you have more doubts or more concerns, then you need to defer this and have those discussions within yourself.
Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nicole, are there any time imperatives? Because obviously it's a pretty tight timeline with going live at the end of October and then wrapping up at the end of November and then reporting to council potentially in December. So does going out to February or even March have any implications for officers?
Thank you very much for the question. Should it be the wish of the council for the administration to undertake the survey, we were looking to bring the survey results back promptly, noting that there is an upcoming election cycle, and in that report we would actually stipulate what the requirements and the next steps would be should community consultation support that concept, so that councillors can understand what is actually required from the West Australian Electoral Commission to then undertake that as a part of the next election cycle. So again, we've looked to bring the matter back to you in a timely manner to address that.
Through the chair, if I may, the governance officer advisor needs to give you a bit of an outline of the process. It's not just about the electoral office, it's also about the advisory board, their processes.
The statutory timeframe will depend on the decision of council as to which way they go. for a very simple change of just electing the mayor by the people, for example, and maintaining the 12 councillors you've got, so you have a 13th, the minimum requirement is to advise the electoral commissioner no later than 80 days before the next election. If you were to become a much more complicated change and process involving changes of councillor numbers or that sort of thing, then the time frame extends out when you would need to consult the advisory board about change of numbers and all that sort of thing. So the time frame will depend on the decision of council as to whether it makes it, if the thing is to change the mode, is to make a very simple change or to get very complicated.
Councillor O'Connor?
Sorry, just a follow-up. So if it was a complicated process, is there a deadline to enter that process to meet the next election?
If you went a complicated one, which was to change the number of councillors, then you would enter into a full ward review, which on the basis of the previous one takes a minimum of 4 months. So you would need to meet the 80 days before the election for changes, you would need to have that done by around about July. So to do a complicated one, you'd really have to start in March to get that 4 months in. And that's hoping that the advisory board steps would go thing. In previous years, the advisory board has wanted all ward change reports to them by the end of March for implementation in that year's elections.
Councillor Ritchie?
It's more of a comment than a question. I'm going to foreshadow that this be delayed until we have some clarification on the local government outcomes with change to the Act, because it's realistic if what goes ahead, we're going to have somewhere between 5 and 9 councillors. And I think we do need to have a look at what that might mean for the ward. And if we go along with this consultation now, and let's say the community says it's a great idea to elect the mayor one way or the other, when we eventually have to decide how many councillors we want, we may look at something slightly different. So I guess I'm just saying, I think this is almost a little bit cart before the horse, and that there's no reason to actually perhaps undertake this, particularly if we go with an extra person, which wouldn't be available in the next cycle. And I also understand that there's some talk in that amendment to the Act that the council elections are brought back in line with the state government, which would mean every 4 years. And in fact, we currently elect our mayor every 2 years. So I'm not sure there's clarification about that either, and that they would also be held in March. So I guess I'm just saying there seems to be a lot of balls up in the air, and I just wonder if we might want to think about delaying this, and that's what I'm really saying, is I'm foreshadowing a motion to delay this until we have greater clarification about what the actual change to the Act will be.
Just a follow-up question in terms of Councillor Ritchie's comments and Councillor Stellard's. Is it unreasonable for councillors to perhaps have a scenario which would outline if those changes were made in terms of the local government reform, the implications for having a publicly elected mayor and numbers, etc.? Is that an unrealistic request? So, yeah, I think that in light of apologies, but I think I feel like we are flying blind at the moment, and I'm not quite sure if we do need to delay it or whether we actually just need the information. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Boyd.
Yep, thank you, through the chair. I'm just wondering if the manager could maybe provide some sort of idea of the cost of this. It seems that this community engagement has many more parts to it than what we usually would do, given we have a citywide letterbox drop. We're talking about shopping centre pop-ups, no indications to how many, just wondering what that entails. Attendance at community events, not sure what community events we're talking about. Obviously, I'm assuming some of those will only be officers' time, but it's officers' time taken away from other things. Seems to be quite a substantial commitment to a community engagement. I'm just wondering what the cost is, especially given Councillor Sewell's last comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Boyd. Great question. Most of those items actually are undertaken within general operating. So the shopping centre pop-ups are regular events where we look at everything that's open at that particular time. So currently, for example, we're looking at strategic community plan. We've got a number of projects on. The significant additional costs for this particular project are in relation to the mail out, which you've touched on, but we aren't proposing to undertake that via Australia Post. It was very successful with the Community Crime and Safety survey in terms of garnering that feedback. The survey itself almost acts like a flyer, so those who don't complete it hard copy actually take the survey and then jump online and complete it. The cost to undertake a mail out of that nature, including print and distribution, so distribution's about $55 per thousand, and it hits about 18,500 of our total households within the city, so it doesn't hit houses that are no junk mail, and it also doesn't hit some of the areas where there aren't letterboxes. The total cost, including printing, is about $3,000. And that is looking to be funded through the advertising and promotions budget. So we're not asking for additional funds at this particular time. Any further questions, councillors? Okay, that being the case, I might close the meeting, and if you could please stay back so we can discuss those confidential items. Thank you. If we can close the doors, and then we can discuss the confidential. Don't need a motion because it's public agenda briefing. So if we could just close the doors, we'll continue with the meeting behind closed doors, and then we'll close the meeting. Thank you. I would like to, yes, so I'm going to kick it off actually, or do you want a quick 5 minutes? Couple of minutes? Okay.